This is the first dispute involving Russia that has been brought before the International Court of Justice since the court's establishment in 1945. For that reason alone, it must be regarded as a landmark even if the court ultimately decides that it is unable to give a judgment on the merits. On the 8th of August 2008, Russia launched a full-scale military operation in Georgia ostensibly to protect its peacekeepers and nationals who were facing attacks and persistent persecution in Georgia's breakaway republics of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Although the immediate trigger of the current legal dispute was that invasion, the conflict itself has a long and protracted history, dating back to the early 1990s and the events that followed the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the emergence of Georgia as an independent state. Although both South Ossetia and Abkhazia had enjoyed the status of autonomous oblast, or districts of Georgia under the Soviet Union, their attempts to unilaterally secede from Georgia during the early 1990s were unsuccessful, and the international recognition of Georgia which accompanied its declaration of independence extended to the whole territory, including the two provinces. There followed a prolonged period of unhappy coexistence between Georgia and the two republics, with both entities enjoying de facto autonomous status within Georgia, with the active support of the authorities in Moscow. The period since Georgian independence was also marked by violence on both sides, with much hostility directed at ethnic Georgians living in the two republics who were frequently subjected to forcible expulsion and destruction of property. The tensions culminated in a ceasefire mediated by Commonwealth of Independent States (CIS) the deployment of Russian-led CIS peacekeepers, although their neutrality in the conflict was consistently questioned. It has been suggested that the events in August 2008 which triggered the present dispute were precipitated by Kosovo's declaration of independence and subsequent recognition by the U.S. and other states, as well as Georgia's public declaration of its intentio to seek NATO membership at the NATO summit in Bucharest in April 2008. Russia, it has been argued, was keen to create ethnically homogeneous client states in South Ossetia and Abkhazia that would be politically, economically, and socially allied and dependent upon it, and act as a buffer against NATO's expansion eastwards. Cessation of hostilities was finally achieved when both parties agreed to comply with the terms of an EU-brokered ceasefire under the leadership of French President and then holder of the rotating leadership of French President and then holder of the rotating EU presidency Nicolas Sarkozy. On the 12th of August 2008, Georgia instituted proceedings in the International Court of Justice against the Russian Federation. The dispute had been widely perceived as grounded in the international law norms prohibiting the use of force. The Russian invasion had been condemned in the Security Council by the European Union and Russia's neighbors, who characterized the invasion as an act of aggression. Georgia's decision to base its application on Article 22 of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination (CERD) may seem to be an anomaly, but as is argued below, it was a deliberate tactical move designed to give the court jurisdiction which it would not otherwise have had, as neither Russia nor Georgia had accepted the court's jurisdiction as compulsory under the optional clause. In its application, Georgia alleged that the attack on its citizens was perpetrated in concert with separatist militia as well as Cossack and Chechen mercenaries under the direction and control of the Russian authorities. Georgia further maintained that joint Russian forces and the separatists in South Ossetia had engaged in a campaign of ethnic cleansing, including murder and forced displacement of ethnic Georgians. In the days that followed the initial attacks, the military operations extended beyond the two breakaway republics into areas under the control of Georgia's government. Although there are conflicting accounts of the casualties, it was widely reported that the invasion resulted in hundreds of civilian deaths, extensive destruction of property, and massive displacement of ethnic Georgians. In justifying its invasion, the Russian Federation put forward the argument that Georgia had committed acts of genocide against South Ossetians and other citizens of Russia. The position of Georgia at the time was that this was an unprovoked act of Russian aggression, and in the days immediately after the attacks, Georgia invoked its right of self-defense under the Charter of the United Nations in sending its troops to repel the Russian aggression. The international community, including the European Union, was almost unanimous in condemning what was seen as an unprovoked act of Russian aggression and supported Georgia's claim that it had a right to defend itself. Against this background, the decision to base the dispute within the confines of the Convention on Racial Discrimination appears as an anomaly and a marginal issue in relation to a conflict that was overwhelmingly about the legality of the use of force. Furthermore, the detailed catalog of allegations made by Georgia against Russia amounted to significant violations of international humanitarian law as found in the Conventions on the Laws and Customs of War, the Geneva Conventions, and applicable customary law. These allegations included summary execution of Georgian civilians, widespread and systematic pillage and destruction of homes, and forcible transfer of ethnic Georgians into civilian camps.